So thank you, everyone, for being here today. As I've said previously, and I think it bears repeating, our hearts are with the families who have had to leave their homes in Fort McMurray. And I want to begin by thanking the men and women who are working around the clock to fight this fire and to keep people safe. Overnight and through this morning, we've heard so many stories of the many ways that Albertans are helping Albertans. People are reaching out to provide support and assistance throughout the province. We've also, of course, as I've said before, been in regular contact with the federal government, and we have been receiving contact in my office from premiers' offices across the country to indicate their support and willingness to help us as we work through this crisis. Our province is strong, and we will get through this. Albertans have proven time and time again that when disaster strikes, we come together and we find the solutions and we get through it. And we come out of it stronger on the other side. We know that that's what happened during the devastating fire in Slave Lake, and we know, of course, that that's what happened through the devastating floods in southern Alberta. The people of Fort McMurray are no different. They are a strong and resilient and focused group of people, and I know that ultimately the community of Fort McMurray will come out of this much stronger. As things stand right now, we know that there's been fairly significant destruction of residences in Fort McMurray. We're looking at roughly 1,600 structures at this point. So we've begun conversations with our federal partners about work that will need to be done with respect to restoration once the fire is, and recovery, once the fire is brought under control. This morning, a memorandum of understanding was signed with the Department of National Defence outlining the levels of assistance that we will require. They have provided us with helicopters to assist with rescue for people that become isolated and who outside of Fort McMurray and who have difficulties getting to safety. They are also prepared to provide us with all of the airlift support that we require in order to bring in both materials and personnel to fight fires within the affected area. In addition, with respect to evacuees, we know that the majority of evacuees have successfully been able to begin making their way south or have successfully found places south of the city. Roughly, and this is a rough estimate, roughly 10,000 citizens moved north, and we are advised that they have found places in most of the camps north of the city. We thank again our industry partners for that support, and as things are now, they have adequate levels of food and supplies. And so that's good. You will have heard that AHS, and I have Dr. Verna Yu here to give you more information as required, the acting CEO of AHS. They successfully evacuated the hospital last night, transferring the patients by land to an airfield where they contracted with WestJet and were able to move them to healthcare facilities distributed throughout the province. Throughout most of that time, they were able to be in contact with the families so that families know where their loved ones are. But should anyone have questions, they need only phone 811 or Red Cross to find out where their family members are. So thank you very much to AHS for that quick work, and also to WestJet for answering the call when we needed to contract that service. With respect to the highways, at this point, transportation through Fort McMurray is limited on the highway to emergency personnel. South of Fort McMurray, from Gregoire down, the highway going south is open. As you will have heard, there was some difficulty with the availability of fuel and supplies on the highway. Work has been going on throughout the evening with the support of the Ministry of Transportation and the RCMP to get fuel to people who need it. And it's being reported to us that slowly the congestion is thinning out, and people are successfully making their way to receiving communities. So That is good. Throughout the day, Emergency Social Services will be engaging in a more thorough inventory of the state of play for evacuees across the province in terms of who's found support, where they are, and what the levels of support are that they need. And they'll be putting together a profile and making recommendations for additional efforts that we can make to ensure that all relocated families from Fort McMurray have what they need to ensure their security over the next few days. In terms of details, I think that is most of the up-to-date information at this point, except, of course, for the state of play with the fire. You'll see that up there on the map. You'll see that it has actually now started to make its way to the edges of Thickwood and Timberlea. It is likely the case that it will move into those communities should the wind do what we expect it may do this afternoon. As a result, of course, that's why those communities have been evacuated. The lower town site, and particularly the downtown to this point, has been mostly unaffected, and work continues there to try and maintain that position. I guess this map doesn't quite show that it's actually crossed the river now, does it? Does not. There's the one. Okay. Yes, so that shows there that the fire has crossed the river, and it's possible will wrap around over the course of today when we expect the weather to change, at which point we are hopeful that the many, many additional firefighters will be able to begin to make some progress with respect to fighting the fire. We've received tremendous support from communities across the province in terms of sending personnel, specialized personnel, structural firefighters into the area along with additional equipment. And so I believe at this point we have the resources that we need, and we are continuing to work very hard to get the fire under control and ultimately to end this crisis. But of course the weather is a key issue, and as you will have all heard, this afternoon is going to be a challenge for us. So I will leave my remarks at this point and let some of our officials come up and provide you with additional detail, and then if you have any questions, we'll go forward with that. Thanks. Thanks.
Hi, good morning. My name is Chad Morrison, Senior Manager with Wildfire. The latest update I have on the size of this fire right now, it's 7,500 hectares. As you can see, it's moved to the north part and up to the Parsons Creek area, as well as it's crossed the river there. We expect it to be a worse fire day than it was yesterday. With winds, the big issue with the winds being gusting west at 20, winds 20, gusting 30. With hot, dry conditions, firefighters will continue to be challenged all day. We expect the fire behavior, similar to yesterday, to pick up at 1 o'clock this afternoon and challenge firefighters well into the evening. For wildfire fighters, we have 100 firefighters on scene at this time, as well as 10 helicopters. And yesterday we had 17 air tankers on scene. We expect a similar amount today. Firefighter safety and first responder safety is our utmost priority. We expect the fire to move from the west through the east here, and we expect it to continue to move over this way. We expect it to also challenge the areas down by the airport as well. So one of the contingencies we have in place is we have a secondary tanker base being set up in Leismere and Conklin at this time. We also have our top Type 1 incident management team on site working closely with the municipality, as well as a Type 1 incident commander working closely in the EOC as part of Wildfire. And as the day continues to move and as things change in this dynamic situation, we'll continue to update on the fire status and progress. Thank you.
Good morning. Scott Long, Executive Director, Operations, Alberta Emergency Management Agency. I'll just give you a quick update of what's gone on over the last 12 hours throughout the night. So as the Premier said, Albertans supporting Albertans. We've had communities such as Boyle, Lac La Biche, Edmonton, some First Nations communities all opened their doors to people from Fort McMurray evacuees who are moving south. Oil and gas have opened up a lot of their camps, have staffed it, and they have adequate food and supplies right now for the displaced population of Fort McMurray, which right now the number we are using is 80,000 people. Last night at 3 a.m., a convoy of structural firefighters the Premier mentioned 88 firefighters from communities throughout the province, 22 tenders, including specialized foaming trucks, all arrived and immediately went to work inside the community of Fort McMurray to reinforce key areas. Right now, their efforts remain focused in the downtown core and in the area of the Gregoire, where there's an industrial park, and of course the airport as well. There's a lot of sprinkler kits and structural engineers or structural firefighters that are doing a lot of work there. Our priorities in the park: safety of Albertans, and that includes first responders and the wildfire fighters. Confirmation of the location and the needs of all of the evacuees. That work is being done today. We'll have a much better assessment of that later on this afternoon. I can tell you right now, I've got 4 people from Fort McMurray moved in with me recently. And of course, supporting the local authority, structural firefighting requirements, and logistical support for all the first responders, which is a challenge at this point in time. Finally is traffic control to make sure that all of the evacuees moving south on Highway 63 are adequately fueled and have the supplies they need. Last one, great cooperation with the Government of Canada. We had a conversation this morning, and excuse me, request for a federal assistance was signed, and as the Premier has indicated, we have aviation assets up there for search and rescue as required, and we also have commitments for air transport, and we are also looking at any other future requirements that may be required in coming days. That's it. Pending your questions.
Go ahead. Good morning, everyone. Just to give an update in regards to health, we started evacuating patients yesterday, and within a span of about 2 hours, we actually evacuated all 105 patients and clients from the Northern Lights Regional Hospital. We worked with WestJet, as the Premier to allocate, as mentioned, to actually move the majority of the patients and clients out from the Fort Mac area last night. The last of the patients were medevac this morning at 9 o'clock, so all patients and clients should be in Edmonton area before noon today. We do want to mention that there are actually 3 reception centers currently within the outskirts of Fort McMurray for individuals who may need help, and that's in Anzac and in Firebag and in Civio. And in those facilities, you're going to have mental health, pharmacy, public health nurses, continuing care expertise, and EMS, which is actually in Anzac. The 911 line is actually working right now, so that if there are any questions, please contact 911 if there's an emergency. In Edmonton, in the East Edmonton area, we've set up another reception center in Northlands. And we've had very good partnerships with the City of Edmonton, as well as with the Northern PCN in Edmonton.
I'll now take questions.
Dr. Just while you're there, you said that the 911 line is working now. Was it not working previously?
No, it's always been working, but we just want to reassure people that it is continuing to work.
And most of the patients then were medevac to Edmonton or Edmonton area facilities?
Yes, so I've got the list of the facilities, but you would expect sort of the local hospitals, so the Royal Alex, the Grey Nuns, Leduc, Sturgeon, U of A, Misericordia, Edmonton General Continuing Care Center, Jubilee Lodge Nursing Home, and the Salem Manor Nursing Home.
Doctor, can you talk about, we've heard, of course, 2 babies were born up there. Can you talk about the process that happens during evacuation and the medical care for this and how they're doing?
So we actually had 9 babies that were actually in the neonatal unit that we had to evacuate along, and I think that all of them had their mothers with them, and they were transported up by the flight, the WestJet flight.
What can you tell us about, there were a couple born in evacuation camps, though?
I actually don't have the details on that, but we can get back to you on that.
Can you talk about the smoke and the heat, the health effects on people in that area as well? It's pretty high right now.
Yeah, I mean, we're quite concerned about that, obviously, and which is why we continue to have the reception centers. I think that if there's any physical effects, I think they need to contact the reception centers. And just to remind everyone, is at Anzac, at Firebag, and at Civio.
What
was it like moving that amount of patients, that volume of people, sick people, getting them onto the airplane and out of harm's way?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I'm really, really grateful and very proud of our staff. If you can imagine our staff that were actually working and evacuating in 2 hours 105 patients and clients. Took a lot of coordination, not just within the Fort McMurray area, but also in coordination with Edmonton and the provincial services. And don't forget that those employees and staff also have their families to worry about. We've actually reserved 92 rooms locally in Edmonton to actually help house them, and we're working hard to sort of connect them with their families so that they know where they are.
What's the state of the hospital in Fort McMurray right now?
Yeah, well, we can maybe ask, but my understanding is that it's still standing.
Questions for the Premier?
Premier, do you still plan to tour the area today? And if so, what do you hope to get a handle on while you're up there?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I expect to be leaving around about 11 this afternoon or this morning, and arriving at the Emergency Operations Center, meeting with the mayor. If possible, we're still trying to figure out if she can make her way back into the city or not. But nonetheless, doing a tour of the area and getting an understanding of the extent of the damage in the areas that we're concerned about, and then of course meeting with officials who are there, and if possible, visiting the reception centers. So that's what we're looking at. There are a number of different issues now in terms of responding to this emergency, as well as planning for recovery efforts going forward, that the provincial government is going to need to be strategic, focused, and intentional on. And it's for that reason that I believe it's very important to get up there and have a clear sense of what's going on, as well as to frankly, personally thank those very hardworking people that are up there protecting their community and serving the safety of the residents up there.
We know from the flood, we know from the Slave Lake fire, this becomes a multi-ministry effort both in this period and in the state. So are you going up there on your own, or are other people from your cabinet going up there as well?
For the moment, it's just me. The lead minister on this, we officially designated Minister Larivee late yesterday, because she's in charge of emergency management agency, and so she will be the lead ministry. Our cabinet as a whole, along with our deputies as a whole, are being briefed collectively every morning at 9 a.m. on the various issues, because you're quite right, it is a multi-ministry effort, but it's being led by the Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Premier, you mentioned the numbers, 100 firefighters, and Mr. Long talked about 88 that came last night. It seems like piecemeal for such a large undertaking. How confident are you that we have the number of people on the ground and the resources to take on such a huge effort?
Well, I think it's one of those things where you have to balance. I mean, your first instinct is to say just, get more people, get more stuff, go. But then, of course, as you know, the example we talked about yesterday with the air capacity, that you frankly get to a point where if you have too much in the air, that becomes a risk. The same is the case for the firefighters. You need well-trained structural firefighters who are able to engage safely and effectively. So that's what we have in place. We have, as we said, roughly 80 or more that have come in. We've got the 100 from our center, and then, of course, we have the municipal firefighters who are already there. And as the way the fire is fought changes, then we have more that are in reserve that can come up. So I feel quite confident that the people that are focused on fighting the fire understand what can be done safely and effectively, and are ensuring that the right resources are there when needed. We have offers from across the country and people that are on standby to come in as needed. We now, as I said, have the federal government telling us that they can airlift in extensive amount of personnel as needed, and so we're waiting for the firefighter professionals to tell us when and where is the best time to fight the fire.
When you're being briefed in the morning, what are they saying? You mentioned earlier that this fire is spreading. How long is this going to go for? And are you guys even looking at to that point, or?
At this point, the focus continues to be on the safety of the residents in and around Fort McMurray. That is the primary focus of all the work that's going on right now. As we successfully move forward and continue with the evacuation, it makes firefighting itself easier because they can focus their efforts on simply fighting the fire and not worrying about citizens who are in or around or could be affected. The hope is that once we've seen the change, the expected change in the weather pattern, that will allow the professionals to more strategically come up with their plan to get the fire under control. So right now it's people, then critical infrastructure, then stopping the fire.
Until this week, the discourse in Alberta was about our finances, our debt position, our credit rating, and then this happens, and we know from past disasters as well that these take a very significant toll on finances. They're very expensive things that again require multiple efforts. So, what are your planning and contingencies and thoughts right now, given that this is coming in the middle of one of Alberta's direst fiscal crises?
My plan is that we are going to be very strategic and intentional in terms of understanding exactly what Albertans need. We'll get a clear sense of that. We'll get a clear inventory of it, and then we will ensure that communities are supported in the way they need to be. We'll work with our partners, both municipally and federally, but at the end of the day, we are going to support the Albertans impacted by this fire, and people need to know that they can count on their government to be there with them.
Traditionally, we hear there's no expense spared. We're hearing something strategic from you. Does that mean that we don't have money to go full throttle?
That's absolutely not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I'm going in there with that from that perspective. What I'm saying is we're going to get a clear understanding of what needs to be done. We're going to have a clear inventory of what the people who, the citizens of Fort McMurray and others who have been negatively impacted, who've lost their homes, what do they need? And once we have a good understanding of what they need, they can be assured that this government will stand with them. And there is absolutely there should be no concern that will not be what they can count on.
What details can you give us about your discussions with Ottawa? What have they specifically promised, and what are you asking them for?
Well, again, as I say, the ask evolves based on the state of play. And so what we've been focused on so far is the immediate emergency response. And so generally speaking, in my conversations with the Prime Minister, I got general statements that they're there for us, that just ask for whatever you need. I suspect, as the size of the evacuation and the scale of this problem has become even more clear, that sentiment has in fact grown. But we're not into specifics yet, except for the specifics that we've already outlined that are focused very much on responding to the most urgent emergency issues. As we start to move down the road with respect to recovery, understanding the scope of the recovery efforts that we have before us, we'll engage, as I say, with the federal government, with the municipality, and we will ensure that the citizens of Fort McMurray and the surrounding communities are supported as they all come together and to get through this. And one thing I failed to mention before is that this morning our cabinet did approve some upfront funding for the Red Cross, and of course we will be matching donations. So I encourage all Albertans who want to help. Right now, the most effective thing that they can do at this point is contact the Red Cross and make donations in support of the citizens of Fort McMurray.
We'll take Tom's question and then we're going to go to the phones.
Yes, so upfront funding, was there a dollar figure attached to that? And how much
It's right, and it's just a beginning bit to seed the fundraising. So it's $2 million, and we will continue to review what the needs are. But we've been in touch with Red Cross, and as their requests come forward, we'll consider them.
We're going to go to the phones now. Operator, please put through the first caller.
Your first question comes from the line of Natalie Pearson from Bloomberg. Your line is open.
Hi, can you give us a sense of the economic cost of this fire? Do you have any initial estimates?
I think that's a bit premature. We haven't gotten into all the details, although Scott could give you some information in terms of the actions that are being taken by the producers in and around. They are, I think, reducing their activity right now, and so I suppose that will, the longer that happens, that will have a cost associated with it. But again, at this point, our entire focus is the safety of the people in and around that area.
We have one more caller on the phone. Operator, please put through the next caller.
Your next question comes from Darcy Henton from Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Hi, Premier. I was wondering if you're going to be declaring a state of emergency. Is that necessary to get funding and help from Ottawa?
We're not at that point yet, but it's an issue that we keep an eye on. At this point, the kinds of authorities that a state of emergency grants us are authorities that, quite frankly, we already have, and we're not in a position to be having to do that across the province. We'll continue to evaluate that as the system or as the crisis unfolds. But right now, there is no authority that we need that we don't have, and there's certainly no funding concern that we have with respect to the state of this, with respect to Ottawa. We all know that this is the single biggest evacuation that we've seen from a fire, and the single biggest overall impact on a community in the history of the province. So I think that we're not going to get too wrapped up in the legalistic details right now. I think everyone understands that their job is to stand behind the people of Fort McMurray, and I have all confidence that that's what every level of government will do.
Don't you need to do that to trigger the funding from Ottawa?
As I say, we will evaluate that going forward.
We're going to take one more question from the phone, and then we're going to start back with Jason on the floor. Operator, please put through the next caller.
Your next question is from Jess Joes from Globe and Mail. Your line is open.
Thanks very much. I'm just wondering if you could provide some specifics on what you might be looking for the military to do.
Well, thus far, what the memorandum of understanding is focused on, again, is helicopter support for search and rescue for people who are caught or left behind the fire line in for whatever reason. Because, of course, we talk about Fort McMurray, but there are communities in and around Fort McMurray. There are people who live outside of Fort McMurray. And so that's very important. The second thing is airlift. The specifics of how the military does that for us is something that they like to hold on to. But if we say we need 300 firefighters in here, then they will get them there. And so their job is simply to use their airlift capacity to get us the people, the personnel, and the materials that we need into Fort McMurray. The additional thing is the issue of whether or not at a certain point we'll be asking them for ground support in and around the area to help us with respect to access in and out of Fort McMurray as we get to a point of establishing when it's safe for people to be in the area.
Arrived yet?
No, we're not at that point yet.
Jason?
Helicopters arrived.
The helicopters have arrived, yes. The first two items are in play.
Question with regards to this map here. First question is, can you explain what that VIRS derived fire extent actually means? This might not be for the Premier, maybe for the fire officials. And also, can you just flip back? I just want to make sure I know how fast that expanding map, the original map that you showed, what time that was at. That was oh my goodness.
Yeah. So that was last night, wasn't it, that one?
This morning at 6:30.
That was this morning, and then...
It's the infrared satellite mapping tool that's used there. So as we get more information and details from the teams on the ground, they'll get better information and maps as we go. Yeah, it's an infrared satellite tracking system. So different types of satellites provide us different types of information at different times a day. So as you can see, the times may be different and the information may be different. And as the situation is more dynamic, we continue to get more intelligence from the ground and get more detailed maps. But the IR part is an infrared satellite imagery we're pulling from.
Sorry, that's the 2-hour spread. So in those 2 hours, it grew by that much into Timberley, into the lower town site area.
I would say as of this morning, from a wildfire perspective, that's not what I would expect. I would just suspect that's a data issue, and just with different satellites capture things differently. I think what you're seeing here, though, is the most accurate boundary at this point in time.
Would that mean that whole area is consumed, or?
That's just where they do the outline is based on where the hot spots are at that time, and so there'll be various states of consumption when you deal with that type of wildfire.
The Premier mentioned 1,600 structures were destroyed. Do we know if those are houses, if they're industrial applications?
Let me pass you this.
Damage assessments are still approximates, but I can tell you right now that in Beacon Hill, 80% of these structures, which are residences, were destroyed. The 2 schools in the arena are still standing. In the Abyssans, there were serious loss of structures, residents, but no detail yet. In waterways, a severe loss of structures, including residents. Again, no detail as of yet. Grayling Terrace, there was 1 house reported as gone and 4 houses damaged. Downtown Fort McMurray remains undamaged. The hospital remains undamaged. Thickwood, as of 0900 this morning, there was 1 house that had been damaged, but there was a number of houses that were being threatened. Timberley, 12 trailers on McKinley Crescent were gone, and the fire is past the northern tip of Timberley, as you can see on the map, so we expect that situation will deteriorate today. Wood Buffalo damaged, but significantly less than Beacon Hill and Abyssal. As you can imagine, again, as I said yesterday, safety of Albertans' first responders, first priorities. Damage assessment is ongoing, but it's secondary to that.
What does Fort McMurray look like if what you expect to happen happens with the wind, with the fire patterns today? What will Fort McMurray look like relative to what it looks like now? I mean,
well, if worst case scenario, you will see that, and today will be a very active day for the wildfire fighters. You could see Timberley and Thickwood, the fire, as was explained by Chad, coming along based on the winds, which are in a westerly direction, coming through and possibly crossing over the Athabasca. That's worst case scenario. The winds will also shift to the southwest, so you could see the airport being threatened, and you could see the Gregoire and the industrial area in that location also being threatened. I can tell you that throughout the night, the experts on the ground are well aware of the winds and the fire conditions, and that's what they were designing. That's what the structural firefighters within the city were factoring in to try and protect the downtown area and to set up their defenses to protect the south area. Throughout the night, I know the wildfire fighters were actively putting in cat guards and defenses all along the southern perimeter as much as possible to prevent the worst case scenario.
If it crosses the Athabasca, as you were saying, it might do that. At that point, that's when it would threaten the downtown then, right?
Quite possibly.
You were saying that, well, we know that there's a whole evacuation for the entire city. Public safety is key here. How many people are still left in the area where there is fire? Is there anybody?
I will tell you this, that the community of Fort McMurray were very, very judicious and far-leaning in how they did evacuation notices, voluntary and mandatory evacuation notices. They leaned far forward. A lot of residents were given ample time. The RCMP patrolled and continued to patrol, not today, but throughout the night they were patrolling through the areas. We have, to this point in time, no reports of casualties or fatalities, and I have not heard of anybody that is still in any of these communities refusing to leave. That doesn't mean that's not there, but we're not getting those reports. Right now, based on the fire activity, you can see that the only people that are in those areas are first responders, firefighters, and I think the RCMP are probably restricting the patrolling right now.
Let's take this last question, and then we're going to let these guys get back to work.
Sorry?
We'll take a question, and then we're going to wrap up, okay?
Have any citizens been caught behind fire lines that required rescuing?
As I reported yesterday, there were 15 residents that were reported cut off. I'm not exactly sure of the location, and it was through the good graces of the wildfire aviation assets. They dispatched 2 helicopters and picked them up. That is the only report of individuals who had been cut off. Thus the requirement for the military helicopters in location today for exactly that, primarily for any Albertans, but we're more concerned about first responders being cut off based on the dynamic nature of the fire.
I want to find a point on it. Are we at real? How likely is it that we could lose the whole town, the whole city of Fort McMurray?
Bad news does not get better with time. It's based on the wildfire reports, the conditions. We don't want that to happen, obviously. We're working towards that, preventing that, but it is a possibility that we may lose a large portion of the town, yes.
I just want to be clear, you're saying there were 15 people yesterday who had to be rescued by helicopter because they were strapped behind the fire, basically?
They were trapped in a location. Either they could not get out through the road. I don't have the details. I can get you those details, but there were 15 that had to be evacuated. Sorry.
Urgent questions all answered? Okay, thanks. We're going to let them get back to work.